Welcome back to the Green Hack, and thank you for spending part of your day here with me. If you enjoy peaceful backyard gardening, practical growing wisdom, and simple methods that quietly transform the way your garden grows, I hope you will subscribe and join us for more videos like this. Most tomato plants never reach their real potential because the roots are limited before summer even begins. At first, everything looks healthy. The leaves are green, the stems seem strong, the seedlings appear ready for the season ahead. But underground, the plant may already be struggling in ways most gardeners never notice. And that hidden struggle often begins the moment the tomato is planted too shallow. By July, the truth finally appears. The afternoon heat becomes heavier, the soil dries faster. Some tomato plants continue growing steadily while others suddenly slow down, wilt earlier, and produce fewer flowers. Many gardeners think the problem starts above the soil. But in reality, the real story began underground weeks earlier. Tomatoes are unlike many other garden plants. They carry a hidden ability along their stems, something that can completely change the strength of the entire plant if used correctly. And most gardeners never fully take advantage of it. What happens beneath the soil during the first 2 weeks after planting can decide the entire summer harvest. That is why I no longer plant tomatoes the traditional shallow way. Instead, I use a deeper planting method that quietly builds a much larger underground support system. Over time, that hidden root network helps the plant absorb more water, hold more nutrients, and stay stronger during long periods of summer heat. But the depth of the hole is only part of the secret, because what you place underground before the roots even begin growing may determine whether your tomatoes struggle through the season or become heavy with fruit later in summer. And today, I want to show you the simple method many experienced gardeners still quietly trust to build healthier tomato plants from the ground up. Most gardeners judge a tomato plant by what they can see above the soil. If the leaves look green and the stem appears healthy, they assume everything is growing correctly. But tomatoes often hide their problems underground long before the plant begins, showing visible signs of stress. And that hidden stress usually begins right after transplanting. During the first few days after a tomato seedling is moved into the garden, the plant enters a quiet recovery phase. Above the soil, the leaves may still appear calm. But underground, the roots are struggling to adapt to an entirely new environment. Moisture levels change, soil temperature shifts, tiny feeder roots become damaged during transplanting, and the plant suddenly has to rebuild its underground support system almost from the beginning. That is why the first 2 weeks matter so much. Most gardeners plant tomatoes too shallow without realizing what they are limiting. A shallow root system may survive during cool spring weather, but summer always reveals the truth. Once July heat arrives, the upper layer of soil dries quickly under the afternoon sun. Weak roots begin competing for moisture near the surface, while stronger plants continue pulling water from deeper underground. And this is where many tomato plants quietly fall behind for the rest of the season. Tomatoes are tropical plants by nature. Unlike many vegetables, they carry an incredible ability hidden along their stems. Tiny hairs covering the stem are capable of transforming into new roots once buried beneath moist soil. Every buried section of stem can become part of an expanding underground support network. But when gardeners leave too much stem exposed above the soil, the plant loses the opportunity to build that deeper root system. The difference becomes obvious later in summer. Plants with shallow roots often wilt earlier in the day. Fruit production slows. Flowers become weaker during periods of heat stress. The plant spends more energy trying to survive than producing healthy tomatoes. But deeply planted tomatoes behave differently. Their roots spread wider and deeper underground. They hold moisture longer. They absorb nutrients more steadily. And during difficult weather, they often remain stronger, while weaker plants begin struggling nearby. In many ways, the future harvest is already being decided underground long before the first tomato even appears. And this is where the 25-centimeter planting method changes everything. The moment I stopped planting tomatoes upright and shallow, my garden began changing in ways I did not expect. At first, the difference looked almost strange. Instead of placing the seedling straight into a small hole like most gardeners do, I began digging much deeper, around 25 centimeters, and laying the tomato plant into the soil at a slight angle. Many people think this technique only gives the plant more stability above the ground, but the real transformation happens where nobody can see it, underground. Tomato plants carry one of the most unusual survival abilities in the garden. Along the stem are thousands of tiny hairs that most people completely ignore. But once buried beneath moist soil, many of those tiny hairs begin transforming into entirely new roots. Every buried section of stem becomes an opportunity for the plant to expand its underground support system. And this is where the deep planting method quietly changes everything. Instead of depending on one small root ball near the surface, the tomato begins building an entire underground network capable of searching for deeper moisture and nutrients. Over time, the root system becomes wider, denser, and far more resilient during summer heat. That extra underground strength often becomes visible later in the season. The stems grow thicker, the leaves stay healthier during hot afternoons. Flowers hold longer instead of drying out under stress. And when fruit finally begins forming, the plant has a much stronger foundation supporting every tomato above the soil. But the angle of the plant matters too. I never place the seedling perfectly upright anymore. Instead, I gently lay part of the stem sideways into the hole before covering it with soil. This creates more buried stem surface underground, allowing even more roots to form naturally over time. The first time I tried this method, I remember being surprised by how quickly the plants recovered after transplanting. While shallow planted tomatoes often paused and struggled during the first weeks, deeply planted seedlings appeared calmer and more stable. And what happens during those early underground days matters more than most gardeners realize. The plant may appear quiet above the soil, but below the surface, an entire survival system is expanding every hour. New feeder roots begin searching outward. Moisture retention improves. Nutrient absorption becomes steadier. The tomato slowly transforms into a stronger plant before summer stress even arrives. That is why I believe the future harvest begins long before the first flower opens. It begins underground, hidden inside the soil, during the quiet days right after planting. Once the deep planting hole is ready, most gardeners think the hard part is finished. But in many ways, this is where the future harvest truly begins. What you place underground today may continue feeding the tomato plant months later during the hottest part of summer. That is why I never leave the bottom of the planting hole empty. Before placing the seedling into the soil, I build a simple organic foundation designed to support the underground system slowly and naturally over time. The first ingredient I add is clean wood ash. Only a small amount is needed, usually about 1 spoon near the bottom of the hole. Many gardeners think of wood ash as nothing more than leftover fireplace material, but healthy gardens often depend on simple things people overlook. Wood ash contains natural potassium, one of the most important nutrients for flower development and strong fruit production later in the season. Long before the first tomato even appears, the plant is already preparing underground for the energy required to support future fruit. Next comes coffee grounds. I like adding a thin layer because coffee grounds help improve soil texture while slowly releasing nitrogen into the surrounding soil. Over time, they help create a looser underground environment where roots can expand more easily instead of fighting through compacted earth. Healthy soil should never feel lifeless or hard like dry construction dirt. Good tomato soil feels rich, soft, breathable, and alive. And this is where many gardeners accidentally focus too much on fertilizer while ignoring the condition of the soil itself. Tomatoes do not simply need nutrients. They need an underground environment capable of supporting constant root expansion throughout the season. That is why I also add finely chopped banana peels. Most people only think about banana peels as kitchen waste, but underground they slowly release potassium and trace minerals over time as they decompose naturally. I always chop them into very small pieces because smaller pieces break down faster and distribute nutrients more evenly through the soil. Months later, the plant may still be feeding from what was buried here today. And that slow underground feeding becomes incredibly important during heavy flowering and fruit production later in summer. But there is one mistake I always avoid. I never place the tomato roots directly against this organic layer. Fresh organic material still needs time to break down naturally underground. So before placing the plant into the hole, I always cover the organic layer with a thin blanket of soil first. This creates a safer transition zone where young roots can slowly grow downward over time without becoming stressed too early. Then I water the hole deeply before planting. That moisture encourages the roots to travel downward instead of remaining near the surface. And once the roots begin chasing water deeper underground, the entire plant slowly becomes stronger, steadier, and far more prepared for the stress of summer heat. Once the tomato plant is finally in the ground, many gardeners believe the work is finished. But the first days after planting are often the most important part of the entire season. This is the quiet phase most people never see. Above the soil, the tomato plant may appear almost unchanged for several days. Growth seems slow, new leaves may not appear immediately. And some gardeners become impatient, adding too much fertilizer or watering too aggressively because they think the plant is falling behind. But underground, something incredibly important is happening. The roots are rebuilding. Tiny feeder roots begin stretching outward through the moist soil. New roots slowly emerge along the buried stem, the plant starts forming an entirely new underground support system capable of carrying the heavy growth that will come later in summer. That is why I always water deeply at the base after planting, instead of lightly spraying the surface. Deep watering encourages the roots to travel downward in search of moisture. Shallow watering creates shallow roots. But when water exists deeper underground, the plant slowly learns to build strength below the surface instead of depending only on the top layer of soil. And this becomes incredibly important once summer heat arrives. During hot afternoons, weak root systems struggle first. The soil near the surface dries quickly, and stressed plants begin losing energy just trying to survive. Flowers weaken, fruit production slows, leaves wilt earlier every day. But deeply rooted tomato plants often remain calmer through difficult weather. They hold moisture longer, they absorb nutrients more steadily, and even during long periods of heat, the plant continues building flowers and fruit with far less stress. What appears peaceful above the soil is usually the result of invisible strength underground. That may be one of the reasons gardening feels so rewarding later in life. It reminds us that the strongest things are often built quietly, slowly, and out of sight. Months from now, the same small seedlings resting in the soil today may become tall vines filled with heavy clusters of bright red tomatoes glowing in the evening sun. And much of that future harvest will trace back to these quiet first days underground. Gardening has never been only about growing food for me. It is also about patience, observation, peace, the feeling of caring for something slowly over time and watching life respond in return. So the next time you plant tomatoes, remember that the real secret is not only what grows above the soil. The real secret is the hidden world growing underneath it. Thank you for spending time with me today here on The Green Hack. If you enjoyed this video, let me know in the comments how you plant your tomatoes each season. And if you enjoy peaceful backyard gardening videos like this, do not forget to like, subscribe, and join us again for the next garden project.